to our 3-hour training with Becky Haas, and especially warm welcome to those who were able to be here for our keynote speech last Saturday. Absolutely blessed to have a world-class trainer in trauma training, and especially in building trauma-informed communities. Becky is world-class. She's working across other countries now and has years of experience in building trauma-informed communities, which is really the foundation of TANA. We're educators. We're about raising awareness for the general community. You know, there are no barriers to this because we're talking about people and the human condition. So welcome, Becky, and thank you so much for your time with us this morning.
Good morning, good evening here in Tennessee again, because what I wanted to start by saying is that what I shared in that keynote, if that was the banquet table, today I'm going to share with you the recipes of how we got to the banquet table. And this training you're going to hear today is, we call it our secret sauce. Well, it's the predominantly the education we have shared the most. I've probably shared this, and I'm not exaggerating, maybe 35,000 people since 2014. So this is the milk and butter and sugar, and my police training, teacher training, doctor training, those are like making a strawberry cake or chocolate cake or something like that. But this is the meat that we have used. And just this past September, I traveled to 3 places, and this is what they wanted. They wanted the keynote and this. So when I was talking to Sue and Bridget and Mike up front, I said, well, let's just go at it the way I do here in the US. So thank you so much for joining us. And it's a pretty full 3 hours. So we will take a real short break about halfway through and stop everything if you need to get up or whatever. And I always like to start training on this topic by just saying, we may talk about your story. We may talk about my story and some of the things that have happened. It's always very likely in any presentation that there are trauma survivors involved, you know, including in my story. And so we never want anyone to feel uncomfortable or to feel triggered. So if we get to talking about, you know, any kind of violence or abuse, neglect, natural disasters, and you need to just step away, get a drink of water, you know, whatever. We really, really encourage you to do that, to take care of yourself. Okay. All right. So as the slide shows, this is the basics of ACEs, trauma, building resilience, and using a trauma-informed approach. So when we did first start out, I didn't have in there the module about resilience, but the more I go at this, the more I see that we really have changed the language. I think it was a gentleman maybe named Philip that asked the question the other day and said, Becky, do you see the language changing? And that's exactly right. Now more and more this conversation is focused on building resilience, resilient organizations, and resilient communities. Okay, so that's what we're going to be sharing today. And there are several videos along the way. And like I said, we'll get about halfway and take a short break. And then maybe at the end, there'll be a few minutes for questions, maybe not as long as we had Saturday. I really enjoyed the conversation with the group on Saturday and or whatever day it was in Australia that we had the keynote. All right, so the first module, the learning objectives are to have a shared understanding of trauma, to identify traumas like the wind. You really don't see wind. What you see are the effects of trauma, or the effects of the wind, so to speak. And we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about how the trauma actually derails brain development. And, you know, sometimes people say, oh, that's just a fad, or that's a buzzword. That's something everybody's putting in grants now. No, ladies and gentlemen, it's science. And some of what we'll talk about in this module covers that. All right, so in some of the key takeaways in this training is to help us shift our thinking instead of what's wrong with you, that maybe that behavior is driven by what happened to you. So also in this training, we want to think about some of the symptoms or behaviors that people present to our organizations with, maybe addiction, maybe victims of violence, those type of things, that these are really adaptations to trauma. And then what I really like about this message is that healing happens. And even though you can't pick where you start in life, we can come along as a community and help people to have a better finish, a more flourishing finish. And that to me is so inspiring. So that healing happens in nurturing relationship. All right, the first video we're going to watch is a real short one, about 2 minutes, on the difference between empathy and sympathy, by Brene Brown.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right, let's, before we talk about the slide, let's talk about the video. So one of the key tools for doing trauma-informed work is to be aware of the importance of empathy. We're not really in a setting where we can really share about this today, but if I was there in person or you were here and we were able to take a few minutes, I would gather that some of you in doing this work have had people to tell you their stories. It's very healing message where people seem to appreciate the fact that in realizing some of what happened in their life, it happened to them. And so we need to understand the value and the importance of empathetic responses. So when I'm training healthcare workers that might work in an emergency room, and maybe someone comes in that's battered or been in some sort of abuse of some sort, we talk about the importance of empathetic statements. And with empathy, we can have a therapeutic benefit without being a therapist. I also teach that to police officers and teachers, just saying things like, I'm sorry that happened. That wasn't your fault. So she does a very good job in that little video showing the two little animals and the difference between trying to fix it or always having one up, like, oh, well, like the one little animal said, well, at least you have a marriage or at least you have a child. That's not empathy, but sometimes it's just perspective taking and seeing something from someone else's side. So when I learned about trauma-informed care, one of the things that really drew me to this message was I began to see any program that got involved using the trauma lens, they begin to see improved outcomes in their service delivery. And, whether you're a nonprofit or government agency or a community agency, everyone wants their service models to be very effective. And so when I saw that services beginning to add trauma-informed approach, begin to get better outcomes, I thought, this is another reason why we need to share this training. And so here's an example with the Topper Academy, the principal in the middle there, Melanie, and then my colleague, Dr. Clements on the other side, who helped me with the work here in Northeast Tennessee. And when we began to see the school, help the school, the teachers become trauma informed. In the first few months, it didn't take years, but in the first few months, the attendance of the school, this high school, went from 55% to 90%. And the good thing is it stayed at that higher rate of attendance. The kids actually wanted to come to school. And then we saw that the kids earning credits, and typically around 140 kids would cover 200 credits in a year. And the first year they recovered 1,155, and typically they would have had about 8 graduate, but that first year they graduated 65. So over and over and over, I was reading a report yesterday of a medical company in California that over 2 years became trauma informed. And one of the things they noted was that escalation between patients and staff really began to decrease and stay decreased. So by adding a trauma-informed lens and a trauma-informed approach, we're going to begin to see service delivery with improved outcomes. Okay, so what is trauma? Well, trauma is defined by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, as an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that are experienced by an individual that are physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, that could have lasting effects on the individual in many ways: mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, and even their spiritual well-being. And a little bit of this we touched on at the keynote, but we're going to do a much deeper dive today. Let's look at the E's one at a time. So the potential traumatic events, we've got them labeled here: abuse, chronic stressors, or loss. We see abuse, some examples of what that could include. We see chronic stressors, poverty, racism, invasive medical procedures, and certainly now with a global pandemic of COVID-19, we have a heightened sense of grief and loss through social isolation and through loved ones that have gotten COVID or loved ones that we've lost to COVID. And then we also see things like living with a family member with substance abuse, or we could add living with a family member that's in and out of incarceration. And another column is loss, death of a loved one, or abandonment, neglect, separation. We could put divorce. We could put a sudden loss of a job. So there are many other things that we could add, but this just gives you a good idea of what are some potential traumatic events. And then the second E is the experience. So you and I can be in the same event and it's not traumatizing to you, while it is traumatizing to me. And from the ACEs study, we know a lot of the reason for that is because of how we have nurturing support. And that if we have a nurturing, supportive relationships, that we will be able to fare much better when we have these hard places. But the experience of trauma can be impacted by how did it happen? When did it happen? Where and how often? And many of the times, particularly with children, when there's abuse or neglect, it's through the hands of known caregivers. It's not strangers. So that, betrayal of parents, betrayal of caregivers, betrayal of relatives, that is going to increase the experience of the event. And then the effects of trauma. These are the kind of the sort of signs and ways we can begin to identify trauma. But you want to think this, you want to think that someone who's a trauma survivor, the way they're adapting, the way they're coping, to them, that is a completely normal response. But to you and I, what they present with might be very abnormal. A little bit later in the training, we're going to watch a survivor story of a woman named Tonier Kane. And you're going to see her do a small group inside of a women's prison. And you're going to see a woman talk about how that to reduce the trauma, pain of trauma in her life, she was used to cut herself. And Neen asked her to raise up her sleeve, and it's horrific, the scars on her arm and on her neck and everywhere where she was cutting. Now to us that seems a very abnormal, but to her it seemed a normal way to help cope with the pain. Okay, so we have the event, the experience, and the effects. All right, so this is a slide that a lot of times, sometimes people photograph it, or when I do police, sometimes they've made a pocket card about this, because this is kind of like a, I'm not sure I could compare maybe with Australia. When I was a child, our boxes of cereal came with a secret surprise, and sometimes they had little surprise to decode things, and I always was happy to get a little decoder. And so if we wanted to decode behaviors that are telling that someone could be a trauma survivor, right here is a good list. It's not an all-inclusive list, but it sure is a good start. So we see physical identifiers of trauma. We see hyperarousal, which means someone is living in a sense of fear. At any moment, something's going to happen. I don't live that way, but to trauma survivors, they feel every situation can be dangerous. Or hypoarousal, where someone is just shut down, where hard to get a response or get an interaction. Or we see those that may have headaches or the ongoing digestive complaints. I was reading a medical study that talked about we're in an age of kind of an undiagnosable types of diseases that are autoimmune related, or maybe things digestive related and related. Many physicians are starting to really feel that trauma is a key to understanding those. And then we see emotional behaviors of trauma, anxiety. Small children, I've heard of 8-year-olds having an ulcer. An 8-year-old shouldn't have an ulcer, but it's just the fact that they're navigating hard places in life. And we see oftentimes shame, people feeling it's their fault they're being abused. And then a real eye opener are the behavioral identifiers of substance abuse, alcohol abuse, eating disorders, compulsive behaviors, anger related, isolation, things that are risky behaviors, because when bad things happen, people are going to cope. And we're in this training today. You're doing the job you're doing in your community as a professional. And maybe, we've experienced hard places, but we're able to move on in some healthy ways because of having healthy ways to cope. But when people don't have healthy ways to cope, they're going to cope in unhealthy ways. And then we see the cognitive ways to identify trauma, the inability to concentrate, memory lapses, decreased distraction. I shared a story, I think, in the keynote, but I'll repeat it quickly. When I train judges in the juvenile system, I give a case study of a teenager named Carmen. And she's in high school, and Carmen has been in the same school area her whole career in school, and she's very well liked. She's a very good student, but here in this year of school, she's not doing so well. She's showing up late, she's distracted, she's not turning in her work. And so a teacher suggests she goes to the counselor at school, and there she tells the counselor that her mom has a new boyfriend, And the boyfriend thinks that Carmen's cute too. And he's been coming up to the school ever so often and checks Carmen out and takes her down the road and violates her. And the first time it happened, she told her mother, thinking her mother would just kick the boyfriend out. But the mother said, oh no, I'm not getting rid of him because he's paying for our rent. And so now Carmen has no protection against this boyfriend coming to the school. And so can you see why instead of just, giving Carmen a punitive approach to her distraction, that distraction has meaning? And so it's so important for us in our professional work, and really, I think personal as well, to be able to identify trauma. Okay, and then trauma can derail brain development. So the brain has a bottom-up organization. The bottom controls the simple functions, such as the vitals. The top area in this diagram, the red and the yellow, the cortex, those are more complex functions, such as thinking and regulating emotions. So when a child is born, they come with all the brain they're going to have, but it's underdeveloped, just like every other part of their body. And what happens is the brain develops by what part of it is used. It develops in sequence. That's why a baby develops everything in sequence. That's why a baby crawls before it walks and babbles before it talks. And so, like all the other parts of development, the brain is developed by what comes before it. All right, we're going to watch 3 little quick videos, one after the other, and then I'm going to comment. These are from the Harvard Center of the Developing Child. It talks about brain architecture, a process called serve and return, and then how toxic stress derails brain development.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without others to support it. Building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later. The key to form strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures, and adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage and serve in return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow. Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is a caring adult to act as a buffer, the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurtured, stable, and engaging.
All right, let's talk about those videos, and then we'll talk about that slide. Okay, so the first video is about brain architecture. So if you are building, the first thing you're going to do, you're not just going to say, well, we'll put a board here, we'll put a roof here. So generally you have a set of blueprints. And the same is true with as a child's brain is developing, and that architecture, those little neural pathways, ones that are used the more frequent are the ones that are strengthened. And that becomes kind of like when we first were married, we got a little dog and put the dog in the backyard. We have a fence, and we never trained that little dog that when well, it grew to be a big dog, but when someone would come in the driveway, the dog would run to the fence and bark, bark, bark. Or if someone came to the gate, the dog would run to the gate, bark, bark, bark. Well, we never trained the dog where to run in the yard. a short amount of time, there was no grass growing on that little path. And that's because that's the path the dog frequented. And so the same is true in the brain. The path that we frequent using that part of the brain is what's going to grow strong. And then the second part said a part of how that grows strong is through a process called serve and return, like a tennis game or a ping pong game, that a child is a toy to a caregiver, and that's a serve, that's an interest, and the caregiver responds, oh, what is that? You know, my 3-year-old son this week, he got to have the fire department. Some of the fire department came to his preschool, and he was so pleased about that, and he wanted to tell us all about it. We FaceTimed him that night, and you know, it's a form of serve and return, talking about fireman, and I asked him if he got to ring the bell and sound the siren. He said, "Oh, Dammy, it's too loud." And you know, and little engagements like that. What is that doing? That's strengthening the little path in the upper part of the brain. But as third video showed, toxic stress derails brain development, because the part of the brain that is activated where a path is growing, when there's no nurturing caregiver, when a child's afraid, like in that video with the child crying and you heard a sound of a siren and no caregiver coming in to comfort them, and part of the brain that's being developed then is there's the survival part, the amygdala, and that's going to produce only fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. So this video or this slide shows a PET scan of 2 children the same age. And notice the circled areas. That's the cortex. That's the upper part. Notice not only on the one labeled the healthy brain, that child has a serve and return, has nurturing support. Notice the high red area at the very top. See, that's the way a child's brain needs to look to be able to come to school and succeed. You know, in the United States, we have a phrase called the school to prison pipeline or cradle to prison pipeline. And understanding the science around brain derailment, around trauma, it really explains that why 2 children the same age are going to come to school, and not one of them may not as well because the brain has not been developed the same. And then the other one is labeled an abused brain. It's a child the same age, a different child. And this is a child growing up in an orphanage in Romania. So they have a very few caregivers for all the children. And though the children have food, have clothing, that kind of thing, they don't have that nurturing serve and return. So notice there how the upper part of that brain has very little red, and look at all that blank space there. And so, you know, professionals, this is science. But the good news is that even in that situation, we can begin to put things in our preschool, things in our school activities, things in our community programs that can help that brain begin to recover what's been lost. So the firearm of the brain is called the amygdala. And if you'll notice in that little diagram, that amygdala is at the base of the brain, a little tiny gland, and then the upper part is the cortex. So the cortex is meant to shut down whenever we're focused on survival. If maybe we're out in the woods, and my husband and I were hiking last week, and I put some photographs up. There was, we went to a nature preserve, and there was some elk, and there was some huge bears, and we were pretty close to the enclosure. And in that preserve, they were doing what they called an animal encounter. And so they did the one with the bear while we were there. And so the game wardens came in, and the rangers, and they would put some food out. So the bears were pretty close. Well, I took some photographs and shared them in social media. And some of my friends were like, "You were that close to a bear?" Well, I didn't mention there's a fence there, so I wasn't worried about it at all. But if that bear would have been there with no fence, you could believe that my cortex would shut down and your amygdala goes to work. That's why it's hard to think in a crisis. All right, this little video gives a little further message on how brains are built. And in this training, we really like to emphasize this about the brain so that people, again, see the science of trauma.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. A child is exposed to serious, ongoing hardship like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support. The basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
All right, let's talk about that. If you notice at the top of the screen, in my citation, it says Alberta Family Wellness. If you go to that website, they offer a pretty deep course. I believe it's about 10 modules on the brain and trauma. Matter of fact, one funder that we had at the end earlier in the year, they said that anyone that applied for the funding, if they had taken this course, it would be put ahead to the front of the line. In other words, they wanted you to have this training. So I believe it's a free training. So just kind of want you to know about some additional resources out there. All right, so what this video pointed out, two main themes. One is, again, the serve and return. And it talked about the serve and return is the process that builds the bricks. So if you're going to build a building and you're going to use bricks, it implied that without serve and return, you aren't going to get the bricks. And then one of the key buildings that the video described being built is the air traffic control. A couple weeks ago, I was flying home late one night and, very dark. I'm looking out the window, of course, don't see anything. And you know what? I'm not concerned because I know there are people that are, on a map and have the numbers and the coordinates. Air traffic control is talking to the plane. And in another flight, we were on Charlotte, and that's a hub for American over here, like Atlanta is for Delta. And we were in quite a few planes until we could take off. And where our plane was parked, I could see them coming in one after the other. And I counted at least 8 or 9 that landed. But in my mind, I saw it was way out there. I was wanting to say, it's okay, go, go, go. And I'm glad I wasn't the pilot. Sure, the planes are coming much faster, but you know what? Somebody is coordinating that from air traffic control. And so, see, when we understand trauma, when kids are exposed to trauma, that totally explains why kids have outbursts, why they aren't controlling their emotions and things like that, because they've not had the serve and return, they didn't build the bricks, and they've not constructed the air traffic control. And so we see that some of that can be recovered by preschool and teachers modeling self-regulation, modeling emotional regulation to children, and then doing activities as simple as things like Legos or puzzles or mindfulness coloring, activities that help a child use the upper part of the brain as far as being strengthened. Okay, so this little slide, it might have been in the keynote, shows that difference between a typical brain development with a little bit of survival and then a whole lot of cognition. Like with my grandchildren, they might think that a room is dark, like that, and they call me and I go in and show them where the light is, and what happens there is a little bit of concern or a little bit of alarm, but you've got caring adults around that child. So the bulk of the interaction that child's having is developing those upper parts of the brain. But children that are living in heightened sense of danger, of neglect, of abuse, the Center for Disease Controls in America says that the #1 form of child abuse is child neglect, children being left alone for periods of time. And so the child's brain is literally developing in the upside down fashion. And this little slide, X1, are real important. We're going to come back to this thing, so really pay attention. I'm going to give you a little quiz and ask you to go in the chat and respond in a bit to some case study about what kind of stress it is. But one of the things I want to point out, notice in each of these little scenarios is a little girl blouse. Okay, so in the first one, it's labeled positive stress. So all of us have a certain amount of stress. Maybe first time you're buying a car, or maybe public speaking. A lot of people don't like to do public speaking. I really don't know why I ever lasted at it. I cried through it during high school. I cried during college. I don't know why I kept at it. But a lot of people get very nervous about public speaking. But you know what? When you do it and then it has a good outcome, then you have courage to do it again, or maybe in a job interview. So there's certain amounts of stress that we're going to face, but we, like the little girl here, we jump over the hurdle, and it kind of helps build our tour to give us kind of courage to take on other challenges. Notice the same little girl in the next scenario, and it's labeled tolerable stress. Now, couple of things there. Notice how big the boulder is, okay? And it's labeled death in the family. Can anybody go in the chat and tell me why this little girl is able to navigate this big boulder? What does she have? Anybody in the chat? Intolerable stress. Why is this little girl able to navigate this larger boulder? What does she have? Let me see. Yep. Support. Yay. Support system. All right. Very good. So see, she wouldn't be able to navigate that boulder on her own, but tolerable stress, which is much more difficult than a job interview, public speaking, but she is able to navigate it with the help of nurturing caregivers. All right. But look at the last one. Same little girl. But look at the boulders now. It's impassable. But notice the labels: parental addiction, abuse, and neglect. And then what's missing? No support system. And the labels on the boulders actually imply the dysfunction is coming from the home. Okay. So what should be support? And I've heard so many stories locally in our schools. I don't told this one in the keynote, but in Topper Academy, we had a young student, 15-year-old boy. The principal contacted me that he was a very good student, but his mother was an addict and she just wouldn't bring him to school. And here in the States, kids only allowed to miss a certain amount of days, and for whatever the reason, and then they're expelled from school and cannot come back until the following year. And she was so concerned because she knew the mother's condition, but she knew the boy, if he went to school, he was doing well in his grades. So she said, do you think you could find a bicycle? And so I said, let me work on it. So I contacted a few people. Bicycle riding is very popular here in my town. And I contacted a couple of people, and within a few hours I had a bicycle, and the man said, well, you want to come get it? I said, no, why don't you take it to the school and you give it to the boy? And so you kind of have the pleasure of just sharing your generosity. So he did, texted me a picture a while later of him, the boy, the bike, and the principal. Well, when I saw the bike, I mean, it was a very nice mountain bike. It was actually had been his bike, and he had recently got a new one, and he was giving the boy his older one. Well, in a few hours more, this same man texted me and he said, I just saw the bicycle go by my house. The reason I know it's my bike is it has pedals. And he said, it's not the boy riding it. And what we found out when we called the principal was he told his mother about the bike, and being it was very pricey bike, she came to the school and stole it. And she took it where she was going to sell it for drugs. And then when the mother found out, the boy told the principal on her. The mother told the boy, don't even bother coming home. I'm not going to allow you to come in the house. So now the boy is not only transportationless, but he's been kicked out, and his mother's stolen the bike. And so, folks, if that is what is supposed to be your support system, then no wonder that kids are struggling. And that's why healthy relationships are so important. So positive, tolerable, and toxic. So when we get very scientific and put it on a graph, it looks like this. Positive stress is peaks up there, but it becomes very manageable, and we go on with our life. And tolerable stress, difficult, but you move into a place of more resilience. But then if maybe you've lost a loved one, maybe at their birthday, or if it's a mother or father, the first time it's a Father's Day or a holiday, that grief comes back. But notice in that, it also eventually goes down as manageable. But look at toxic stress. That little picture right there is why I was recruited to work in healthcare, because when our body is living in a state of toxic stress, and our amygdala is what we call it in the United States, fire hosing out cortisol, now we see certain types of autoimmune, heart disease, COPD, diabetes, cancers are caused by overstimulated amygdala, too much cortisol. It's a needed substance, but we don't need so much of it. And that's again why ACEs is a social determinant of poor health. Okay, so we see the different stresses, the different types of response. So some of the factors that can increase the impact of trauma is it happens early in life. And many times there's blaming or shaming. One of the saddest things to me about trauma is when a parent tells a child, you're not wanted, you're not loved. I've heard of relatives telling a child as young as 4 years old, as they raped them, they said, I do this to you because you're trash. And you know what happens? A child doesn't stop loving that adult. They stop loving themselves. And that's what's so sad about trauma. And there's much blaming, shaming, being silenced, not believed. And often the perpetrator is a trusted caregiver. So it brings us to the question, are these really problems we're dealing with in individuals that come to our service organizations or are these adaptations to trauma? And, you know, a few years ago, my husband, well, he fell and he had to have shoulder replacement surgery. And because of the type of work he does, he's retired now, but he has been a contractor for 50 years. He had actually, the other shoulder was in pretty bad shape. So over the year, he had both shoulders replaced. Well, he could drive for several months. And when I took him into the orthopedic office where we wanted to do the follow-up visits, in that orthopedic office, almost everyone sitting there had a cast, had a cane, had crutches. I mean, you know, except me or their loved ones that were helping them with transportation. But I didn't think it was anything strange because I'm in an orthopedic office, an orthopedic surgeon office. So everyone there has had some type of adaptation to a surgery or a procedure and they're healing. Well, now we need to think about addiction. We need to recognize maladaptive behaviors for what they really are as adaptations to trauma. So the sets of problems that may be coming into our center, we see children in an after school program or in a basketball league seem unruly. We need to realize that these behaviors can totally be traced back to traumatic events. So behavior is really like an iceberg. We only see the small part above the surface. Below the surface are the feelings and emotions that drive the behavior. And the misbehavior we see in a child is often their attempt to solve a whole other problem of which we're unaware. So this is a nice little slide. Just give scenarios of children at school. I have slides of this for police and slides of this for doctors. But in a school setting, we may have a little child that doesn't join the crowd. And maybe a teacher would think, well, that child's just shy, or come on, I'm going to get you to integrate over here. But see, maybe to that child, bad things happen when I get around others, or the one in the bottom, little child playing and just outbursts of anger. And those children look surprised that she's so angry. And it really has not a lot to do with what may be going on there in the game room. It could be fueled by what's going on in her home situation, or the little child disconnected. And that's like the story I told about Carmen, or the child that's hyper vigilant, is just sure at any minute the bear is going to run into the room. And this is a very nice slide that I got many years ago, 6 years ago, from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. If you don't know about that website, oh, that website has a lot of resources. They have a free educator toolkit you can download. They also have a lot of stuff about, they have judge bench cards. I don't know what the courtroom setting looks like there in Australia, but in the United States, these are some little shortcuts for judges and using a more empathetic approach. So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network is a very highly regarded authority on this topic, and they have so many resources. They also have a lot of free online trainings that you can take. But notice this in bluish color labeled trauma, and you look through there and you see behaviors. Some of them we've already talked about. These are behaviors that are characteristic of trauma happening. And then notice ADHD on the other side, but notice how much overlaps. So when I'm training mental health providers, particularly school counselors, I tell them slow down on giving a diagnosis of ADHD to a 5-year-old, because the thing is having a diagnosis of mental illness as a child can be another layer of trauma, that I'm different, that I'm bad, I'm defective, something like that. And so we need to make sure that maybe those behaviors aren't mimicking something that's happened that's traumatic. Okay, so this is from Dr. Siegel, the Whole Brain Workbook. And I mentioned at the end of the training some of the resources that you can find to build a nice trauma and resilience library. But in his book, he gives a little illustration with your hand. And usually when I'm somewhere in person, I'll have everybody raise up their hand and wiggle 4 fingers. That's your cortex. And your thumb, that's your amygdala. So while we're in the training, if you make a fist, that's the way your brain is. Your upstairs brain has got the downstairs all tucked in, and you're absorbing this, maybe taking notes, drinking coffee. But if while we're together, the bear runs in the room, this literature calls this flipping your lid, that your cortex shuts down and your amygdala goes to work. And the problem is that oftentimes when too much trauma is happening, it damages the stairs, and it's hard for kids to get back and forth between upstairs and downstairs. And in my teacher training, I talk about 3 messages that we can do with children when we see they're downstairs. Give the message, you are safe. And then we move to the middle, the emotional realm, and we talk about, I am with you. And then we get to the upper level. Now let's solve problem. See, professionals, you're not going to solve the problem with someone when they're in the downstairs, when they're dysregulated. You're going to have to get them to the upstairs. And I use tools like deep breathing, or some of the mindfulness things, even a glitter jar or chimes or mindfulness coloring. Some of those can be easily used to help move someone from a dysregulated place up through the brain to the upper part, where now we can solve problems. I got a letter from a school resource officer after he'd been through my police training, and he was called to meet with a young boy in school who'd been in a fight. And he had the boy sit down on the grass, and the little boy was also upset. And he told the little boy, let's practice blowing up a balloon. And that police officer didn't have any balloon around, but by that little boy and the police officer pretending they were blowing up a balloon, what is that officer doing? He's getting that little boy out of the downstairs into the upstairs part of the brain. All right, now let's talk about a bit about building resilience and positive childhood experiences and protective factors. And here in a bit, we'll get our break. So we want to think about metaphorically, all of us have in our brain a fulcrum, okay? Have you ever played on the playground seesaw? And I'll never forget my sisters. I have an older sister, younger sister, and 2 younger brothers. And we'd be out on a playground and riding the seesaw, and one of them get bored and jump off and crashing to the bottom, because as long as there's no weight on there, it's not working. But think about in our mind this fulcrum, okay? So if you have a positive life view, then it's because you have had positive experiences in your life, and your fulcrum is positioned so that you see life positively. However, if you have had a lot of negative, the fulcrum is shifted to where you have a negative life view. Do you have the phrase, do you all use the phrase, a half glass full and a half glass empty? That's kind of the same thing. Somebody would see, oh, I've got a half a glass of milk. And the other one would say, oh, we've only got a half a glass of milk. But a lot of that's where the fulcrum is shifted. But the beauty of trauma-informed care is we move the fulcrum. We can help children have positive experiences to where this negative life view can be shifted. And so I'm going to show 2 videos, and they're true stories. And the young men that they're about, first one is Chad, the second one is Josh. Particularly Chad's story, I just want to kind of pump the brakes here a minute, let you know it's the first few times I watched it, it made me cry. It's a tough story, okay? These are wonderful, 2 wonderful, resilient young men. But in both of these case studies, as we watch the video, I would go in the chat, and on Chad's video, I want you to say who is his support system, and then what type of stress did Chad have? Was it positive? Was it tolerable? Or was it toxic? And then we're going to show the video for Josh. Josh had a different situation happen. And then I want you to go in the chat, enter who's Josh's support system, and then what kind of stress did Josh have? Okay, everybody got that? All right, here we go. Here's Chad's story. I'd love to meet these 2 young men sometime. They so inspire me. I've heard these stories so many times.
just a kid. I mean, because here everybody knew our business, knew what was happening to us, and it was brutal. Oh my God, there's a school. If you go right up here, there's a turn, and you can situate it.
It's a tough thing back here.
Yeah. This is crazy. There were some good times though, like we'd have a good 30 minutes or so before we heard the sliding glass door open. And one day he came in and he actually had pizza, like supreme pizza. And another day, everything, it was fine. And another day he came in, for no reason, he just smashed my mom's head against that cabinet there. Just thinking of, just to the left of where they're playing, it's where my brother and I would play. My dad, he would come home, we had to be really good at sports and stuff, so. There's one time where we're sitting, I knew it was coming. I knew my brother, Bobby, I knew that he would be the one to bear the brunt of it. And so I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Chad reminds me of a lot of the kids that come here, angry, very angry. And you could tell he just didn't want to act with anybody. And you could tell he was hiding something. He always came in with a nervous stomach. My stomach hurts. And he finally came clean and told me his father had major anger issues. He said, you know, I need to talk to somebody. And I instantly thought of Coach Morrow.
Chad wasn't a football player per se. He was just a kid that had energy that needed to do something. He needed to be a part of something because I don't think he had anyone as a role model or someone showing him what to do. On the whistle.
Coach Morrow was the only person I really trusted in this town. He was always there.
Yeah. There was times I would give him a ride home. We would talk, sometimes we wouldn't talk. But it was interesting to have a discussion with a young man who had no one to talk to.
He was the only one there for my graduation. Even my family wasn't there.
You're doing good. You're okay.
I just remember when you were walking us, I just remember looking up. He had this big old, just ear to ear grin.
It takes a village to raise a child. And it doesn't matter what nationality, what race, we're all from the human race. If you interact with someone, it shows them that you care.
Good memories, you know? Yeah. You gotta hold on to those.
It's love thy neighbor. It's what we should do.
When's the last time you saw him?
About 8 years ago. And actually right over here is Lucille Barbecue. The best barbecue you'll ever have in your life. Coach Morrow actually took me there, like after high school graduation. But take this right. It's gonna be your first right over there. Just pull in, not this one, but. I freaking knew it. I freaking knew it. I knew something was up.
No,
I knew something with that. I knew it. I knew y'all were doing something.
no, you didn't. There he is.
Yeah. I heard you were in town. I knew you couldn't pass up some Lucille's. Oh, good to see you. so proud of you. You've done well. You've done well.
Such a powerful story. Okay, go to the chat. Who was the support system for Chad? Let's see what we're getting in here. Who was the, yep. Yeah, okay. And what type of stress? Yep, toxic stress and coach. Yep, everybody good. Everybody's passing my class with flying colors. Now, the only other thing, the lady in the white blouse, she had a role, and I don't know, she's never defined. She could be a teacher or maybe a guidance counselor. So that's the only other thing is whatever the teacher, the coach, and the toxic. Yep, great. All right, next story, our next case study is Josh. And I want you to do the same thing. And both of these stories are such wonderful examples of resilience in hard places.
From what I understand, his father passed away, and he would have pictures of him in his locker. Some students thought it would be a good idea to rip down those pictures and harass him and bully him for missing loving his father.
Going through what I went through, you keep to yourself. You don't know who you are or anything. You're walking through the space, empty space. It's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to find your way to the good things in life.
No one wants to be bullied. Everyone wants to feel like they mean something to somebody.
It's definitely a hard 4 years of your life, you know?
Even like a few words can affect someone so negatively.
I'd sit in the cafeteria alone. I wouldn't talk to anyone. Even if people invited me to sit with them, I didn't feel this was my place to be, you know?
Coming to a city school, a lot of people said, you're just going to make it worse. I didn't know what else to do for them. So yeah, we just took the jump. I was pretty scared, you know. I kind of thought the city experience, maybe a bigger high school rather than a small town high school, just might be better.
I hope that attending the school, I would be treated like everyone else. Yeah, I just wanted to make it and just be a normal kid. I was sick and tired of being no one. I wanted to be someone and wanted to reach out to people and show who I was.
I just remember at first they called him the doorman. They thought he was weird.
It was definitely kind of weird. It took a while for people to adjust. But once people realized that he was continuing with it, it almost became something to look forward to in the morning. You walk up the stairs and you know that Josh Yant's going to be standing there with a big smile on his face saying, "Good morning."
No problem.
The first few weeks when I started doing it, they were kind of shocked.
Good, you?
Not many people hold doors, right? But after that, people started to open up to me. Opening a door is more than a physical act. It's putting yourself out there, getting to know people, making them feel comfortable, making them feel welcome.
Thank you.
Of course, it gives people hope, people care.
I think that was his way of saying I'm here and I'm not going to be invisible anymore.
He had literally, just by holding doors and saying good morning, he had made a drastic change in his life.
It was definitely a positive effect. People want to do nice things for other people. He set a good example for other students.
Everything changed huge. I mean, everyone said it. All the teachers, the students felt it. They talked about it, you know, that he changed things in the school. And he was a changed Josh.
We were honored to have Josh. We were privileged. any school would have benefited.
I think prom king was a way to say thank you from the students and the staff. So when he won, it was like his moment to shine.
When we heard Josh Yant's name pulled out, it was like pretty much everyone out there and been prom king because it felt everybody won.
Yeah, he's standing tall and straight. He's got the big grin on his face and got the crown.
I never expected to get an award or anything like that. I guess I was just happy enough to make it through.
Just 1 year and things are totally turned around. Totally. And it would have been fine if the story stopped there. It could have, and it would have been okay. And he still would have been the same person.
So now is the moment. Let's all line up to the side of the room. Once we're all lined up quietly, we will head down to the gym.
I would have never thought he would be a public speaker because he had been so shy, but he took to public speaking like a duck to water.
He draws them in, and it's this aura, it's this personality that he exudes. He's been there, and so they relate to him in that respect.
When I heard your story, it kind of made me feel like I could be more like myself.
It changed the way I thought about things. It changed the way, like, how I felt about myself.
I personally think that you shouldn't let, like, what's going on around you affect your personality or the way you act.
I think he shows them just be courageous. You know, don't let bullies get you down. Just, you know, fight back in your own way with a little kindness.
It's amazing how one little act can change your whole life. I never thought doing something simple could be so rewarding.
All right, so Josh's father died, and let's see. Yep, himself, his mom, his teachers, the mom, the school community. Let's see, did anybody put, yep, tolerable. Yep, there you go. So it was tolerable stress, and his support was his mom, and particularly his mom. So right there we see, you know, two true stories, survivor stories, resilience stories of two young men. You could tell in Chad's story how much it meant when he saw at the end the coach. And did you hear in his story how he said no one came to his high school graduation but the coach, you know? And so whatever amount of time that coach gave to him, I mean, it meant the world to him. And, you know, in both of those stories, there could have been counseling, but there's no indication that these young men went to counseling, that the focus of their resilience happened through supportive relationships. So good job there, recognizing toxic stress and the tolerable. All right, so some very important information that's been published in 2019. Dr. Christina Bethel did a study of ACEs data from 6,100 adults surveyed in Wisconsin. And her study came out, and as revealing as the adverse childhood experiences study was, so is the protective childhood experiences study, or the positive childhood experiences study. And what she learned in that research was that though this is maybe fact, they aren't fate, and the kids who experience many positive childhood experiences during childhood, they become adults that even when they're presented with a mental health need or a challenge, they know how to ask for help. And so that's what the study showed, is that kids that have important adults in their life, that when they do have challenges as adults, they can ask for help. And the other thing she learned was that the relationship between positive experiences and good mental health is dose responsive, kind of back to our fulcrum idea, that more we have positive. I was training a bunch of community leaders in April in one of the Middle Tennessee cities, and the staff was there from the juvenile justice court. And one of the probation officers raised her hand and said, wait a minute. She said, I'm always thinking we've got to get more counseling for these kids. But what you're saying is that if we give these kids some positive experiences, it's going to help. And I said, that's exactly what this research showed. And so the 7 positive childhood experiences that Dr. Bethel uncovered was the ability to talk with family about feelings, and I felt experience that in difficult times, your family is supportive. And we know family can look like many different things. We often have caregiver families where we have grandparents raising children because of an addicted parent. It's just the fact that we have a family member that's supportive in difficult times. And then also enjoying participation in community traditions. We have a lot of history of our nation right here in Tennessee, where I live, and we have outdoor dramas in the summer, reenactments of those things. And our boys, they never would sign up to be in them, but their friends would be, and we would go to them. Just became a part of our summer activities, and particularly of feeling a belonging, especially in high school, and feeling of being supported by friends, and then having at least 2 non-parent adults genuinely care. So in whatever role you're working with children and young people, you want to bring out these messages, because just like we bring out the messages of social distancing and hand washing and mask wearing to be protective during COVID, now this research has showed us what is going to help kids navigate places and not go in a direction to addiction or alcoholism or tobacco use, by steering them in a direction of having healthy adults in their life. Then lastly, feeling safe and protected by an adult at home. And what her research showed is that when we increase the protective, promotive factors, then we're going to decrease the risk factors. It's kind of like me. I've been on a diet, and when I get off my diet and go back to eating carbs and chocolate, well, when I go in that direction, there are factors, okay, the clothes tight again, or whatever. Well, that's the same with the health of young people, is that when we will focus on after school activities or the coaching things. And, in the United States, a lot of times when schools are struggling to meet their budget, the programs they cut out band, cut out athletics, and some of the very things that kids need to be able to thrive. Okay, so when we promote and increase protective factors, we reduce the risk factors. All right, we're going to watch this little video, and this is from the Center for Disease Controls. And I want you to listen to the story. It's told by a guy, I believe the name is Marcus, and he's going to talk about some things that happened in his community that helped his life and his family. And then he's going to talk about some things that he sees around the community that's helping some other people. So if you notice some of these things that you feel he might be pointing out as community protective factors, go in the chat and make a list, okay? You're doing so well at all this. And we're going to take a break here soon.
Hi, this is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs. And despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus, he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. As a kid, He let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Tino. This helped our family in so many ways. He did my dad's steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes. It was a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need and prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here to sponsor summer camp. Community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Her helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities, baseball, and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for being ACEs, everybody wins. Life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people and group action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. You can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families, changing social norms to support parents and positive parenting, by providing quality care and education early in life, by enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development, and by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need extra help so they don't become an ACE statistic. Stable and nurturing relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
All right, let's see. Did anybody come up with what were some of the things that he was talking about? Yep, work, childcare, positive interactions, community. Yep, that's exactly right. All the kind of things. Yep, that had in his parenting skills. They talked about. Also, did you notice when he said there was a career fair? And when his father got a job, how he was nicer to them because he felt better about himself. And so when we, see the need for some of these things, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris in California, when she was a mentorship, when she was a pediatrician and learning about ACEs, she said that if she likened in her TED Talk, if she likened ACEs to lead poisoning, she said in her practice, she could help families, children with lead poisoning, learn more about it. She could help them be comfortable with the symptoms, or she could go to the house and find the lead. And that's what this is pointing out right here is that we realize that it's a new form of medicine, so to speak, by having these protective factors of having a job, having food. Matter of fact, earlier today, I was in a meeting. There's a software company I'm working with that has a brilliant product called Wellbeing Community. And they have organizations that get a wellness coordinator, and then they line up all these organizations, your food bank, your housing piece, your parenting classes. And then when people are in this type of household dysfunction or toxic stress ongoing, then they can be enrolled in a program. And this program helps them fill out the forms and navigate to all these types of services that are going to help them to flourish. So some of the family protective factors, concrete support in time of need. And the way I define that is that, you may have dozens of friends, but who are the kind of friends that if you had to go into the hospital at night, who would you text? Or if you had a need and needed someone to run an errand for you, that's going to narrow this a little bit to that type of closer relationship, to what would be concrete support. And then social connection, parenting skills, your own personal resilience, and then the ability to help children develop these social connections and the ability to foster nurturing attachment. And then in the community, we saw the video said that some of the community protective factors, safe neighborhoods, safe schools, safe, stable housing, access to nutritious food, access to employment, medical care, behavioral health, transportation. In my community, we have about 70,000 in my town. But the bus runs on Sundays. It doesn't run on nights. If you had to try to work a job that was night shift, you didn't have a car. We're very limited in transportation. And so access to childcare, and then inclusion, equity, so that all services are available to all. Okay, next slide. It's going to take a minute or two to explain. So why don't we do this? I'm going to set my timer for about 7 minutes. I'm trying to give you long 5, but not 10, just because we really still have a lot to cover. So I'm setting it for 7 minutes. We're going to take a break and come back. All right.
Thank you, Becky. Enjoy a short break, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Okay, we'll get started again. Hope everybody stretched out there a minute. Okay, thinking about what we just ended on with the protective factors, let's talk a little bit about this slide, because this slide here is kind of the key to build resilient organizations and a resilient community. And this helps to illustrate something that's been missing from becoming resilient, that before, when we think about trauma, everybody immediately thought about, oh, we don't have enough clinical, we don't have enough behavioral health, or where are these resources, which those, I'm not underestimating the importance of those. But in learning about trauma-informed communities and bringing resilience, what we learned is that healing, like Chad, like that can happen at the community level. Some scholars feel that 70 to 80% of trauma is healed through these community approaches. Dr. Bruce Perry, who's top of the food chain in this subject, I heard him on a podcast recently talking about how that more healing occurs through these community type interventions instead of in a clinical setting. So we want to see that, notice that these, if we were doing a pyramid, notice these are larger, okay? So we want to think about resilient communities, resilient organizations have a trauma-informed approach where it is the norm at every service level. And that's what we're going to be able to do. Take this training content and begin to cast the net wider and build your partnerships where everyone is on the same page. If you think about somebody with domestic violence or a child going into state custody or someone in the justice system, if we had more time today, we would talk about what are all the organizations that the same family or the same individual is going to use to navigate these hard places. And it's more than one organization. that's why we need to have all of our organizations using the trauma-informed lens. So when we have more and more organizations using this approach as the norm, then we are providing programming information, scheduling appointments, to the delivery of services, and our services are made with great effort to not re-traumatize the consumers. Then what we're going to see is we're going to see more resiliency in our community. My favorite story about this is about the bus driver with the little girl, and there was on the CBS News one night before COVID. I heard a bus driver telling this story, how that in the bus route that she drove, there was a little girl she struck up a friendship with. And she just so enjoyed the little girl every day getting on the bus. And one of the things about the little girl, she always had her hair braided. But several months into the school, one day the little girl wasn't on the bus. So the bus driver was concerned. The next day, no little girl. The next day, it ended up a whole week, the little girl was missing. So the next week on Monday, the bus driver was really relieved that when she got to that bus stop, the little girl was there. However, she noticed the little girl's hair was not braided. So the next day, she welcomed the little girl. I missed you last week. She noticed the little girl wasn't as smiley, but the little girl looked up and smiled at the kind bus driver. But the next day, the bus driver saw her again, but still her hair wasn't braided. The third day, she was there, but her hair wasn't braided. And finally, on the fourth day, the bus driver said to the little girl, "I sure missed your braids." And the little girl looked up at her and she said, "Last week, my mommy died and my daddy doesn't know how to braid hair." And so the bus driver was so touched by that she dropped the little girl off and went to the store and bought a clean hairbrush and a bag of bows. And she told the little girl the next day on the bus, "Braid your hair." And the teacher noticed that when the little girl came back just wearing the braids again, that she started to smile, and in a few days started to re-engage in the classroom. And the teacher noted that it had to do with those braids. And she told the principal about it, who told the superintendent. And this whole story was on their local news and made the national news. And that's what I'm talking about with community resilience, that the smallest of gestures, and man, that's my favorite topic in all of this, is community gestures. A story of a man that's a best-selling author here in the United States, was many years in foster care, and he had a bad experience in foster care, and but he loved to read, and he had neighbors that just noticed walking by the house a little boy sitting out on the front porch, and every time they passed, he was reading, but the more they passed, they noticed he's always reading the same book. And so he thought maybe he doesn't have any books, so they just started bringing to the porch little boxes of used books, and it took a little time for the boy to know where they were coming from, but that was just the kindness of the neighbors to help this young man on his journey. And so many of the things like that could build community or organizational resilience. And then the next level is one thing we know about trauma survivors. When we go back to our slides about behaviors, many people that trauma survivors, they're overwhelmed in life. Sometimes when people are staying in a hospital a long time, or when we can visit people before COVID, and someone may be in the hospital a long time, they're overwhelmed with things about life. So sometimes we need that case management. I've learned this working in the prison program. The folks in there, the justice system, have experienced a lot of trauma. And we can give them a card and say, "Here's a job program." We can give another card. "Here's this, here's that." But you know what? We learned that sometimes we need to bring all the services to our center, all the forms, and we needed to help them to fill out the forms. Sometimes people just needed that extra help getting on their feet. And so we have that layer of healing as well. And many of the programs in my community that are becoming trauma informed, they're adding additional layers of mentoring and case management. And you always do it without shaming or without blaming. And then we have our behavioral health. So can you kind of see the recipe here that we're building resilience through healing communities, healing organizations, using a trauma-informed approach, believing in resilience, and then we provide extra layers of assistance and mentoring, always in a non-judgmental fashion. And then we have clear access to behavioral health. The other day I was training all these teachers, and at the end the lady said, "Do you ever stop and breathe?" I don't know, I just get so excited. So think about resilience like charging stations. It's just such a great metaphor because we all get it. You know, when I went to bed last night, my battery on my phone was on the low side, but you know, I didn't lay awake thinking, what am I going to do? I'm not going to have a phone tomorrow. No, all I did was plug it up into the charger and go to bed. But we need to think about that many of the people we work with, many of the people, you know, that we serve in our services, they're coming in and not having their batteries charged up. And so what are we doing in our services that offer resiliency? Is it a kind greeting? Is it a warm atmosphere? You know, 20 years ago when you flew on an airplane, nobody got off the airplane looking for a electrical outlet. But now everybody is, because we all have those things. You know, I'm always, when I'm in an airport and you have somebody as an adapter and they're using like 4 of the different plugs, you're like, seriously? You know, and even hospital furniture now starts in the waiting room, has those things to charge up. So think about that in your organization. Are you draining people? Because many of the people with trauma are coming in drained, okay? So healing begins trying to be overcome by resilient skills and caring support from others. And the positive childhood experiences study showed that these positive things are a buffer against the health effects of adverse childhood experiences. All right, now our next module, we're going to talk about the actual ACEs study, the prevalence of trauma, and why we can operate with a universal precaution approach that trauma has occurred. And then we're going to watch Tonier Kane's story, a trauma survivor. And it's just such a great story, so inspirational. And it really connects childhood trauma to addiction to the justice system. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is show you a little film about the actual ACEs study. And if you've seen Paper Tigers or Resilient, this little film is made by the same people.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Philip tapped 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. Now that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. Learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation. Please visit kpjrfilms.co.
All right, let's talk about that little video there a minute. So the ACEs study, which I know many of you are pretty familiar with, Dr. Vincent Folletti and Robert Anda. Actually, they were doing work independently and they learned about each other's work, so they came together and created the ACEs study. The 10 questions were scrolling there on the screen of the video. 5 things did this happen to you before age 18, or 5 things did you see this in your home? And what they uncovered, they never in a million years really expected to see the commonality of ACEs, and that generally when someone said yes, one of those things happened, then likely they want to encounter more. And then the more someone experienced ACEs, they saw that these were same individuals that were struggling with an addiction, with risky behaviors, early introduction to the mental health system, and it was consistent across the board. And so this is really, I heard, because it seemed like it took a long time for anybody to notice it. I've heard it referred to in conferences as the most important study you never heard of. But now, thankfully, more and more, it's really gained recognition and being looked about as a social determinant of health. So this slide really illustrates that when the entryway into life is filled with adverse childhood experiences or toxic stress, it's going to lead to those altered brain connections, which we covered earlier, and that's going to lead to the toxic relationships, the risky behaviors for coping, and those risky behaviors are going to lead to the poorer health, going to lead to addiction, going to lead to incarceration, and that is going to lead to early death. Hang on a minute. So when I first heard Dr. Folletti and heard about this in 2014 and early 2015, this next slide kind of was my thought process, my response. Here, working with felony offenders with addictions to create a jail diversion program to reduce recidivism. And I hear Dr. Folletti, according to the ACE study, if a man answers yes to 6 of the 10 questions, he's 46 times more likely to be an IV drug user than a man who says none of that happened. And I'm in the middle of a program and a jail of 700 people, and every single one of them has addiction. And I felt like I'd heard the cure for cancer and wondered why nobody was talking about it. And so I pulled up on my computer the American Heart Association, and I know from the health plans in America over the last couple of decades, more and more in our health insurance plan, they want you to cooperate with your health. So if you need to lose some weight or quit smoking or, some of those types of things, there's classes about nutrition to try to keep people away from diabetes. And my husband, he's old enough now that he's on Medicare, and he was so happy because he doesn't have to go to those little health classes. He is not a good compliant person. Even though he's as skinny as a rail, he likes to eat his pie and ice cream, and I'm the one in the classes. But he used to have to go with me. We had to go to get our poll. And the Heart Association said if you don't exercise, you're going to be 12% more likely to have a heart attack. If you are a tobacco user, 50% more likely. And look at the amount of public education, billions of dollars around public education related to smoking, cessation, and exercise. But where's the education? And that's what I'm so excited to be cheering TANA on today about, because you all are running with this topic in your community as I am here in the U.S. So let's talk about the prevalence of trauma. So trauma in the mental health field. So in the mental health area, a history of childhood trauma predicts, according to the ACEs study, they saw consistently that trauma predicted earlier first admissions to mental health, more frequent, longer stays, more time in seclusion or restraint, greater likelihood of self-injury or suicide attempts, more medication use, and increased symptom severity. Now, these are statistics. I shared some Australian Tasmania statistics on the keynote that Sue had provided, but these are statistics in the U.S., but I would think that they're pretty consistent to Australia, or actually any country in the world, that a high percentage of clients that are in substance abuse treatment, they all have histories of childhood trauma. 75% of women in substance abuse treatment have report a history of trauma. 92% of homeless mothers have severe trauma histories. Actually, Dr. Folletti wrote a paper. If you've not seen it, it's very, very insightful. And the title is something about don't treat the addiction, treat the trauma. And we had legislators when President Trump was our president, they were working to pass an opioid crisis bill. And I reached out to my senator here in Tennessee because he was the chair of the committee putting this together. And I was able to bring his director in. She sat through this very training. She got it. She put me in touch with his policy writers in Washington, and I was able to get that Dr. Folletti report. Don't treat the addiction, treat the trauma. And they were able to put some of that trauma language in that opioid crisis bill. And so see that it's not a small of those with addiction or homeless. It's predominantly all. And then the prevalence of children, we see that 60% of American children are exposed to violence. 40% of children are the victims of 2 or more violent acts. 1 in 10 children are victims of violence 5 or more times before 18. So if you were just calculating the violent acts right there, that's 1 in 10 children in America have an ACE score of 5 or more. In 2017, suicide in America is the second leading cause of death for children ages 10 to 17. The CDC calls it death by despair. Professionals, no children should be despairing life at such an early age, but that's what trauma does, robs children of hopes and dreams. And then 3.5 million to 10 million children witness violence against their mother or stepmother. And in juvenile justice, 94% of children have experienced. So why is a country, should TANA, why should I in the United States focus on trauma in children? Because eradicating child maltreatment could potentially reduce many of the things, and we share this in the keynote. This is the upstream approach to addressing depression, alcoholism, drug use, suicide, domestic violence, and the need for incarceration. All right, now we're going to watch, it's a 25-minute clip. I'll probably cut it off about 20 minutes. There's an hour-long documentary called Healing Neen that SAMHSA made. This is a pretty amazing story. And I'm going to just show you the clip that's on YouTube because for training purposes, it's better to kind of go with the shortened one. But she was arrested over 80 times with 66 criminal convictions, substance abuse, prostitution. It's almost unbelievable. The photos she's going to show you of herself when she was arrested. She was living under a bridge for 19 years. And in this video, she so well articulates the connection between trauma and drugs and crime. So we're going to watch this and come back with one more show.
I'm about to go back into the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women to do a presentation for the inmates here. Just 4 years ago, I was an inmate here. It's good to be on this side. It's good to be on this side.
Her out here through the different partners that we have in the community. Her name is out there. She's known by a lot of people for the positive work that she's doing. And you wonder how someone be so happy and jovial and have gone through all the trauma that's gone through in her life.
Hello. Okay, so this is B building. This is the very last housing unit that I was in. Just 4 years ago, this is my home.
1989. I remember the first time I was here, I went through the jail system, deaths, prostitution, possession of CDS, possession of open container.
I'm coming into work at the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors.
My mother had a way of when she hit you, she would hit you with a belt, and she would hold the strap belt so the buckles would hit you, and she would hit you in your face and your head with it. So we often got a lot of scars from the belt buckle.
And this is my mother's birthday.
This was in '94. At this point, I was homeless, sleeping beneath a bridge, eating out of a trash can. I couldn't go in anybody's house, including my mother's. He brought me down here to get high with. He said, you know, you don't sleep in the bus stops no more. A lot of times I was beaten. These two houses were crack houses. Punch down here and take a hit of crack right here. It's a very secure building. And this is my office. I have an office. I have scars. I have a scar right there. Right here I have, you can't really tell, 2 black eyes and a busted lip. Thank you for receiving us here in El Paso. My name is Tonia Kane. I was molested. I was raped. I was beaten. I was raped. Now, this is how it's supposed to be for me. I am nothing. I'm never going to amount to anything. And this is how it is. And I'll stay. I'll die just like this. And I had become comfortable with that. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Kane here to MCLW. Good evening, ladies. And thank you so much for coming out. spending a little time with me tonight. I'm so thrilled to be here, to be able to stand in front of you beautiful, wonderful women and just help you to understand that it's all about you. So I'm telling you, I'm standing before you with 83 arrests and 66 convictions. They say I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail or die in the streets. And I tell you today, not so. Not so. And, you know, I ended up with the drug addiction of 19 years. But you know what, I don't have to tell you about what it is that goes along with drug addiction, do I? I really don't. But what I want to tell you that it wasn't using drugs that was the problem. It was what happened to me as a child. My mother would entertain a lot of different men. You would be partying and you would hear her singing and, you know, laughing. But when the music stopped, I knew I was going to start hearing the footsteps come towards our bedroom door. And at age 9, I positioned myself in front of the bedroom door to protect my brothers and sisters, but in the event, it made me available to the men. I brushed my teeth because I thought maybe I could brush away the smell of men when they did the axe to my mouth. My mother's an alcoholic. She's always been an alcoholic, and sometimes she was in the household 2 and 3 days at a time. But only at age 11, that something was truly wrong in our household. Because we were always looking out the windows, but we weren't allowed to play. My mother wouldn't allow us outside because she did not want anyone to know what was going on in that apartment. Well, somebody thought that was wrong, and they called the Department of Social Services. And when social service came into the household and seen the conditions we were living in, they immediately removed us from that household and put us into foster care. Well, we ended up going to court, and I remember the court day. I was excited with seeing my brothers and sisters. And we were on a pew. And in the front, my mother she was crying. She was real upset. Sitting beside her, y'all, I don't know where they found him at with my father. He was sitting there. Not to say I'm going to take my kids home with me, but to give reasons why he wasn't. So 9 family members was allowed to choose each and every one of them. And I ended up with my cousin. And she was a nurturing and good person. This is my cousin. She's actually my second cousin, but when I was growing up, I always thought she was my aunt because the older generation was like aunts. But when I came into your household and you guys gave me so much love and you showed me how to take care of myself, and it was good time because I was getting up there in age, and because I never knew how to wash myself or wipe myself. Barbara didn't teach me that. So you taught me all of that. So I remember you being in the bathroom with me, showing me how to take my hygiene because I didn't know. And talking to me, patiently talking to me. I wasn't used to being like a normal kid because the living situation I came out of. My mother came to the household where I was living, and she called me, Ning. That's what my mother calls me. So I ran downstairs and I opened up the door and I ran and she hugged me and she said, I love you. I want you to come back and live with me. She told me she loved me, the words that I've been dying to hear from her. Within a week, she severely beat me in the middle of the street for trying to go to school. By then, she had 3 more kids. I realized she wanted a babysitter. She didn't want me back because she loved me. That's my mother over there in the white. No, I'm just saying. I know you know though. You can't. I absolutely want mothers to love me. Sometimes I will be here and don't want to get high, but she want to get high, so I would go out and prostitute so she could get high, just so she could love me. I thought that I had to earn her love, and I thought if I go out and prostitute for some drugs, she'll be proud of me. And she would usually get mad because there's no more. That's how I always ended up with her. How much? What you need? Yeah. I know what you're going to get.
A big one. This time be going, because I'm going out like.
Well, I didn't know how to live without my mother, because I knew I couldn't live with her. So I remember taking an overdose. I remember waking up in the emergency room. I remember when nobody asked me, what happened to you? I remember them telling me, you're going back home with your mother, and being terrified. So she came up with this great idea that one of her drinking buddies, who thought I was cute, he was 24, I was a child basically, wanted to marry me. What was that? An opportunity to make my mother proud of me once again. I jumped on it. I'm walking down the aisle. She signed the papers. I didn't even have to be there because I was a minor. So I moved, I'm married. I'm married, and my mother's living with me. And my husband would come home, and he would do like this. If it was dust on his finger, he wanted to know what was I doing all day long that I could not dust his house. Well, there was many beatings because I didn't dust his house. 19, somebody came to me and said, try this. And it was crack cocaine. I ain't get no beatings for dusting the house no more, because after one hit of crack, I cleaned my house. I went upstairs, cleaned the neighbor's house. I was outside washing everybody's cars. Shoot, I ain't get that beating no more. But you know what? Using crack cocaine introduced me to the criminal justice system. Hi, sweetie. Nice to meet you. Prostitute, and I lost 5 children in the system this time. This time. She was triggered. I was wondering, is it possible she could be in a group tomorrow just to... Yeah, okay, absolutely. Did you just... So you ladies chosen because we think that your story, you collaborating with my story, and sitting here and just doing this focus group, talking about where you've been, you know, and how things feel for you now and where you want to go. My parents were heroin in the county where I'm from. It was heroin addiction. Foster care, psychiatric facilities. I went through all of that.
I never told my mother that my brother used to molest me. This is the first time I'm telling it now.
Well, my mother not just getting high, her friends get high. You know, people on her job get high. And they get together and have party and get high.
My father would beat my mother all the time, so I saw that. And I ended up going through it myself. Every relationship I've ever had has been abusive. And if they're not abusive towards me, I'll be abusive towards them because I feel that's how they show me love. They don't care about me if they don't put their hands on me when I do something to hurt them.
My mother sacrificed me for the sake of keeping a man. And my first time being molested, I was 4 years old. My mother took my hand and gave it to him and told me, you going to play with his nieces. But when we got to where we was going, wasn't nobody there but me and him. And I remember being really, really dark. But when I came back, I felt different. And I remember looking at my mother, and it seemed like she didn't see anything wrong. And I remember when she took me in a room that night to put me to bed, I wonder why she didn't notice I didn't have the same panties. Even now, I'm 37 years old, and I sleep with the covers tucked under me for security.
80% of our population has been traumatized. The trauma is the underlying reason and the basis that leads to the medication, the drug use, and then eventually landing in jail.
But I didn't know how not to come back. I didn't know how. And something inside of me just, I didn't have the motivation to want to be sober. Because I went back to my reality. Homelessness, put myself in harm's way, staying with people that was going to beat me and hurt me and stuff. I'm like, you know, so it was easy to just drink and drugs. And unfortunately landed me right back here really quick.
Up to 90% of individuals who are in the public mental health system have been victims of trauma. About 5% we know from Department of Justice of girls in the juvenile justice systems have been the victims of early physical sexual abuse. About 97% of homeless women who have mental health issues have been the victims of trauma, while they were only 87% have been victims of early childhood abuse. Over 50% of women in substance use programs report histories of incest. I mean, it's just universal.
And so this is the ACE study, matching in this very middle-class population. The population is exactly half women, half men by chance. 8% white, including Hispanic, 10% black, 10% Asian, 74% have been to college. In no way is this some dismissible group, you know, that, yeah, well, maybe those people across town, etc. It's basically you and me. And what we found was extraordinary. A, the prevalence of these 10 categories, and B, the remarkable effect that they had 50 years later. 28% of the women have a history of childhood sexual abuse. I mean, who the hell would know that? In terms of injection drug use, a person exposed to any four of those categories was 1,350% more likely to become an injection drug user at some point later in life. If you go to ACE score 6, exposure to 6 of those categories, you're wildly off the scale, because now it's a 4,600% likelihood that an ACE score 6 individual will become an injection drug user compared to an ACE score 0 individual. I mean, so you know, I mean, the epidemiologists at the CDC told me, look, these are numbers that we see once in a lifetime as an epidemiologist, once in a career. So the numbers are of extraordinary magnitude. I met Tony Kane several weeks ago at a conference here in Baltimore when this sensible young woman came up and looked me down and told me that she had experienced all 10 of the categories that I was talking about.
I don't spend a lot of time around my mother because, like I said, she's still abusive. But I go to, you know, pay her bills and all, make sure she has food in the house and everything, because she's not an alcoholic now. She's a crack addict. You know, I looked at her and I could see the sadness. She was sober, you know, because she was just getting up in the morning. And I just so badly to reach out and hug her, but she wouldn't allow that. My mother won't allow us to do that. We're not even allowed her mom. We call her Barbara.
Any thoughts why?
I know. You know, but I never really thought about it.
Well, maybe being called mother imposed a responsibility that she didn't feel up to.
Yeah, that's true. Well, this particular day I had made a deal with these two guys, and they had like massive amount of crack. And I went to them and said, well, you know, they was trying to get me to, you know, do some sexual things. I said, well, if you give me this amount of drugs, I'll do this, and this. So I thought it was a good negotiator, but I guess I wasn't, because when we were going behind this building, they started to talk among themselves. And when we got back there, they were saying, well, we're not going to give you anything, but you're still going to do this, and this. And after they did that, they beat me really bad. They stomped me, spit on me. And when and they left, you know, when I was able to get up and get around here, it was the officer. I'm standing against his car. And when they see me, I was walking to him, and I was in a lot of pain. When he see me, he was like, Miss Kane, we've been looking for you. Because I had a failure to a warrant out. I was trying to tell him the two guys that's walking past us laughing at me just did this to me. He thought I was trying to, I guess he thought I should run off, and he thought I was resisting. So when he grabbed me, he grabbed my arm and put it behind my back and threw me against the car, which cracked my nose open. I'm not angry with them, because people that do things like that, I mean, we talking about two guys caught up in that street world, and all they know is hurt and violence, because that's what they grew up with. And my hope is that they're not doing that to anybody else, because they think it's okay, because they haven't acknowledged it, you know. And but I see people that hurt me all the time, that rape me. I see them all the time. You know, so I was small.
Tell me something about cocaine. What's the good part?
What's the good part about cocaine? It's a number. It absolutely, positively numbs out any feeling you have for a few seconds. That's why you got to keep doing it again. But there is no concern. So, I mean, I used to take a hit of crack cocaine, and I used to get high on the fact that I had it in my hand. Didn't even get it in my system yet, because I know in the next few seconds I'm going to be somewhere else, and I don't have to deal with reality. you know,
and effective treatment.
and effective treatment.
And that kind of forces the question, treatment to what?
Right.
Which is kind of uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear.
Yeah.
And I think I had mentioned to you about crystal meth.
Right.
And how pretty much everybody knows that's the most commonly sold street drug in the country. And no one seems to know that the first prescription antidepressant introduced in 1940 was methamphetamine. And it was the main prescription antidepressant for the next 20 years. So does that mean something? And then you get to, well, it's a lot easier to say to somebody, my kid's on crystal meth because that damn drug dealer's in the neighborhood, and it's to say my kid's buying antidepressants on the street.
Right. I couldn't use drugs and alcohol because I was in jail. So I had to find something that help me cope. And that's what helped me cope. I would fight, I would argue, I would cuss, I would go on lock, and I would get off lock, I'd do my time, and, you know, oh well, see y'all later, I'll be back.
And I would mutilate myself, my thighs, my neck had cuts, my arms. And it wasn't to kill myself, just to get the pain out. That was just a way to express the trauma. I felt helpless. I felt powerless. And being a woman in a powerless situation, it brought trauma. Because trauma came from those situations where I was taken advantage of and felt powerless.
Would you mind, Christine, if I see yourself? Can I see that? Because I know you showed before. What do you use?
I would take and bust the glass out in my room and the pieces of the glass and cut myself up, cut my neck. I would like break the toilet, break the glass out in the doors and the windows. Or I take a stapler, I take the staplers out the bed. Or I took an eggshell one time, the hard on the eggshell. Yeah, just to get there.
Toni is an amazing woman, a passionate advocate, a great leader in the field, an amazing speaker. We've known each other for 5 years. When I first met Toni, when she was at the Women's House of Correction in Jessup, and she was praying out to here. She now, as of yesterday, officially has become the team leader for the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care, which we couldn't be happier. She's just a joy to be with. You hear her story, I think you're going to be as I am every time I hear her as well. So for that, my friend, Sonia Kane.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here in New York City. I'm down at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women for violation of parole. And I'm pregnant. And I'm terrified that I'm about to lose another child. And I remember running around and telling people about my fears. I don't want to lose my baby, and I'm a baby. And they're telling me about a program called Tamar's Children. Well, they say, you know, it works on your trauma. I said, well, I don't know what that is, but I know about it. And it works on your addiction. I said, well, that's a given. Your mental health, I'm crazy. You recover and you keep your baby with you. Perfect program for me, right? I was keeping my baby. And the first thing that someone said to me when I got to this program, the first session I had, my therapist told me, everything that happened to you as a child happened to you, you didn't do to yourself. And I believe that. And we still do work. See, because you put folks, you know, substance abuse, even parole and probation, try to help me, try to give me some tools on how to live. But you know, the good information was only surface. It couldn't get where it needed to for me to get it rooted so I can build a foundation and grow from. So my belief system came from I am nothing to I am anything I want in this world. It wasn't so you had to get it out of me to get the good information down there where it needed to be. My therapist, her first task was to help me to feel safe. Because without feeling safe, there's no healing for me. Everything needed I was able to get from this program. I had someone to help me to understand parenthood, you know, helping me to form a secure attachment with my child. I didn't know how to be a mother. You know, I know how to give birth to a baby. But then she said, it's time to work on your children. No. I said, no. How do you heal from something that's still going on? Okay, my mother didn't love me as a child. She didn't show me love. Okay, that happened. That was then. I was raped, I was hurt, I was beat, I was raped, I was hurt, I was beat. Okay, that's happening more. But my children are still living. They're still walking this earth so fast, and I know nothing about them. How do you heal from that? And she said, you do, but not by yourself. So I had to talk about my daughter when she was only 10 days old, and when they came and they took her away from me, they put me in jail. And the way my son looked, grabbed him, and he was crying, Mommy, don't let them take me. I had to remember that. I had to remember my son being picked up for the weekend and never brought back. And it was work. I'm exhausted. I've been on travel now for, it seems like 2 weeks straight, like maybe going home one day just to repack.
Okay, we're gonna stop it here. It's right near the end. But isn't that an amazing story? I mean, I really wish we had time to discuss it. But you know, I guess I do this work, I think about what Toniers or what needs are there in my community, or what needs are there in communities that I'm having to encourage with this message. You know, she's a very popular speaker in a lot of the communities that I'm in, and she has retail a store in Baltimore now. I'm connected with her on LinkedIn. I've never had the pleasure of meeting her, but she's filming another film right now. And you know what an amazing story. But when in prison, pregnant with her fifth child, having lost four children to the system, she is a pilot of a trauma group, and she sees that it's not, you know, all what, you know, she wasn't born bad. It was a lot of things that were set in motion by what happened to her. And you could see her mom is an addict as well. But so many things she talked about, how she would get high, but she wanted to get high with her mother. And you see over and over where she talked about ways she was trying to please her mother. You know, she said, I couldn't live with my mother, but yet I couldn't live without her. And then that's when and then when she got married at a very young age, and then that's when she was introduced to cocaine, and that's what introduced her to the justice system. But just an amazing story of resilience. And but it really, I tell people that if you have 20 minutes with a judge or with an attorney or with someone in the justice system, and they're willing to watch this, I think it just builds a very strong case for why we need to have trauma groups, trauma opportunities for people in the justice system to connect the dots with trauma in their own life, as she did in that program. So we are going to now move on to our last module. We're going to talk about the principles of using an informed approach.